The morning sun cast gentle waves of light through the crystal waters of New Tidal, the crown jewel of the Gelnari Confederation. Veltar floated peacefully in his office dome, watching the daily migration of silver fish that swirled around the underwater city like living clouds. His translucent body pulsed with the soft blue glow that marked him as a colony administrator, and his long tentacles moved with practiced grace as he reviewed the day's reports. Everything was perfect, as it had been for the past 50 cycles. The water temperature held steady at the ideal range. The artificial currents carried nutrients to every corner of the city. The mining platforms on the ocean floor extracted metals without disturbing the delicate ecosystem. New Tidal was proof that the Gelnari could create paradise anywhere in the galaxy. The first alarm was so soft that Veltar almost ignored it. A gentle chime that meant the deep space sensors had detected something unusual. Probably another merchant vessel arriving early with supplies from the core worlds. He let one tentacle drift over to the communications panel, expecting to see the familiar signature of a cargo hauler. Instead, his gill slits flapped in shock. The display showed energy readings unlike anything in their databases. Massive signatures were moving at the edge of their solar system, too large to be ships and too organized to be natural phenomena. Veltar's chromatophores flickered with confusion as he tried to make sense of the readings. "Alert the defense fleet," he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked urgent communication among his people. "Unknown vessels approaching the outer system." Commander Sylvan arrived within minutes, her silver body reflecting the emergency lighting that had begun to pulse throughout the administrative center. As head of New Tidal's small defense force, she had trained for pirate attacks and territorial disputes with other colonies. Nothing had prepared her for what the sensors were showing. "Administrator," she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "The signatures are enormous. Each one is the size of a small moon, and there are dozens of them." Veltar felt his body temperature drop, a natural response to extreme stress among his people. Could they be colony ships? Perhaps another species seeking to establish a settlement? Sylvan's response made the water around them seem to freeze. "They're moving too fast for colony ships, and Administrator, they're heading straight for our inhabited worlds." The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. The Gelnari defense fleet consisted of 12 graceful vessels designed more for policing trade routes than fighting wars. Their plasma weapons were precise instruments meant to disable rather than destroy, perfect for dealing with smugglers and pirates, but useless against whatever was approaching their system. As the unknown fleet drew closer, the horrifying truth became clear. The ships were not built by any known species. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved with mechanical precision that spoke of artificial intelligence rather than organic crews. Most terrifying of all, they were accompanied by massive construction vessels that looked designed for only one purpose: taking apart entire planets. "The historical archives," Veltar whispered as realization struck him. "Bring up the old warnings, the ones from the first expansion period." Sylvan's tentacles moved frantically over her control interfaces. Ancient files appeared on the displays, marked with warning symbols in 17 different languages. The documents spoke of something called Devourers, machine intelligences that consumed entire star systems for raw materials, leaving nothing behind but empty space and broken asteroids. "But those are just legends," Sylvan protested. "Stories to frighten young swimmers. No one has seen Devourers for 3,000 cycles." The view screen filled with the image of the approaching fleet, now close enough for detailed scans. The ships were even larger than the sensors had indicated, and they moved with the terrible purpose of predators that had never known defeat. Energy readings showed they were already deploying smaller vessels, scout ships that raced ahead to map the system's resources. "They're real," Veltar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And they're here." The first contact between the defense fleet and the Devourers lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Gelnari ships opened fire with their plasma weapons, bright streaks of superheated gas that should have carved through any known hull material. Instead, the Devourer ships seemed to absorb the energy, their hulls shifting and adapting in real time to resist the attacks. The counterattack was swift and overwhelming. Beams of coherent energy lashed out from the machine ships, cutting through the Jelnari vessels like knives through kelp. 9 ships were destroyed in the first exchange. The remaining 3 retreated in panic, their crews broadcasting desperate warnings to the colonies below. In his underwater office, Veltar watched the disaster unfold with growing horror. His people were peaceful beings who had spent millennia perfecting the arts of diplomacy and environmental harmony. They had no concept of total war, no understanding of enemies that existed only to consume and destroy. The approaching devourers represented everything opposite to Jelnari civilization: machines without mercy, consumption without purpose, destruction without end. "How long do we have?" he asked Sylvan, though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort. "At their current speed, the main fleet will reach New Tidal in 18 hours, she replied. "Their scout ships will arrive in 6. Veltar's mind raced through every option available to them. They could evacuate some of the population, but their transport ships were too few and too slow. They could try to hide in the deep ocean trenches, but the Devourer ships would eventually strip away the planet's crust to reach the metals beneath. They could attempt to negotiate, but the historical records made it clear that Devourers had never shown interest in communication with organic life. Then he remembered another file, one buried so deep in the archives that most Jelnari believed it was a fabrication. A set of coordinates marked with warnings even more severe than those attached to the Devourer records. The file spoke of a quarantined system where evolution had gone terribly wrong, creating beings so dangerous that they were banned from contact with civilized species. The file called them Deathworlders. According to the ancient records, these beings came from a planet where everything was designed to kill. Crushing gravity, poisonous atmosphere, violent weather, and predatory creatures that hunted in packs. Most galactic species agreed that life could not possibly exist in such conditions. Those few who claimed to have encountered the Deathworlders described them as impossibly violent and aggressive, capable of surviving injuries that would kill any civilized being. The coordinates pointed to a system on the outer edge of known space, far from any civilized world. If the Deathworlders even existed, they were probably dead by now, victims of their own violent nature. But as Veltar watched the Devourer fleet approaching his peaceful world, he realized that desperate times called for desperate measures. "Open a broad-spectrum transmission on all frequencies," he ordered. "Maximum power. Send it toward these coordinates." Sylvan looked at the ancient file with obvious confusion. "Administrator, even if anyone receives this signal, how could primitive savages help us against Devourers?" Veltar began composing the message, choosing simple concepts that any intelligent species should be able to understand. "Because," he said softly, "sometimes the cure for an impossible problem is something equally impossible. If these Deathworlders truly exist, if they really come from a world that creates only survivors, then perhaps they know how to fight what we cannot." The transmission began broadcasting into the void, carrying a simple plea for help toward a star system that might contain only empty space and broken dreams. But as the Devourer scouts entered the outer atmosphere of New Tidal and began their grim work of cataloging the world's resources, Veltar found himself hoping that somewhere, in the darkness between stars, something was listening. The signal reached Earth during the 3rd shift at Deep Space Command, when most of the planet slept under a protective dome that filtered out the worst of the radiation storms. Lieutenant Maria Santos was monitoring the long-range communications, a ray from her station deep within the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, a facility that had been expanded over 3 centuries to house humanity's growing space operations. The first thing that caught her attention was the power behind the transmission. Someone had pumped enormous amounts of energy into this signal to push it across interstellar distances. The second thing was that it was clearly artificial, structured patterns that spoke of intelligence and desperation in equal measure. "Commander Williams," she called out to her superior, who was reviewing patrol reports from the outer colonies. "We're getting something unusual on the deep space channels. Unknown origin, massive power output, and it's asking for help." Commander Jake Williams had served on the asteroid mining stations before taking this assignment. He was used to the kind of problems that space threw at human beings. Equipment failures in hard vacuum, solar flares that could cook a person inside their suit, and the constant background radiation that made long-term space service a slow death sentence for anyone without genetic modifications. "Let's hear it," he said, settling into the analysis station next to Santos. The alien message played through the translation software, artificial intelligence systems that had been designed to handle communication challenges humans faced in the hostile environment of space. The translation was rough but clear enough. An unknown species was under attack by something called Devourers, and they were asking for help from anyone who could hear their transmission. "Sir," Santos said, highlighting parts of the message on her screen, "look at these coordinates. They're sending this toward our system specifically. Somehow they know we're here." Williams frowned as he studied the tactical analysis. The attacking force described in the message was massive, dozens of ships the size of small moons, with technology that could adapt to resist any weapon used against them. It was exactly the kind of threat that Earth's military planners had been preparing for since humanity first reached the stars. "Get me Admiral Chen," Williams ordered, "and prep a full analysis package. If this is real, she's going to want to see everything we have." Admiral Sarah Chen was reviewing engineering reports aboard the dreadnought Indomitable when the priority transmission reached her. The ship was currently docked at Luna Station for repairs after a 3-month patrol of the outer colonies, and Chen was looking forward to a few days of routine maintenance instead of the constant emergencies that seemed to follow human expansion into space. The Indomitable was a product of human military philosophy, built to keep fighting even when everything went wrong. Her hull was made from asteroid metal, reinforced with carbon composites. Her engines were designed to run on any available fuel, from hydrogen to refined metals. Most importantly, she was crewed by humans who considered radiation exposure, crushing acceleration, and months of isolation to be normal working conditions. Chen read through the alien distress call with growing interest. Humans had been looking for other intelligent life for centuries, but this was the first communication they had received from a species that seemed genuinely peaceful. The Gelnari message spoke of cooperation, environmental harmony, and cultural exchange, concepts that most human colonies would consider luxury items compared to survival and security. "Navigation," she called out to her bridge crew. "Plot a course to these coordinates. How long would it take us to reach their position?" 2 weeks through hyperspace, Admiral," came the reply. "But that's pushing the engines hard. Most alien species would need suspended animation for a journey like that." Chen smiled grimly. Humans had been making impossible journeys since the first colonists left Earth. Every human colony existed in conditions that would kill most life forms within minutes. The generation ships that carried them there had been built like mobile disasters, designed to keep their crews alive, even when everything broke down at once. "Signal the fleet commanders," she ordered. "I want the 3rd Deep Space Fleet ready for departure within 12 hours, full combat configuration, extended deployment supplies." The 3rd Deep Space Fleet was humanity's answer to cosmic threats. 12 dreadnoughts like the Indomitable, each capable of independent operations for months at a time. 40 heavy cruisers designed to fight in the radiation fields around gas giants. Hundreds of support vessels that could manufacture ammunition, process fuel, and conduct repairs in the deep void between stars. Most importantly, every ship was crewed by volunteers who understood that this mission might be a one-way trip. Humans had learned long ago that the universe was actively hostile to life, and anyone who traveled beyond Earth's protective dome needed to be prepared for anything. As the fleet prepared for departure, Chen recorded a message to send ahead of them. The transmission would reach the alien system days before the human fleet arrived, assuming anyone was still alive to receive it. "Unknown beings," she began, standing on the bridge of her flagship with the bustle of departure preparations visible behind her. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We have received your distress call. We understand you are facing an enemy called Devourers, and that your defense fleet has been overwhelmed." She paused, considering how to explain human capabilities to beings who came from a peaceful world. "You should know that we are coming from what your records probably call a death world. Our planet taught us to fight for survival from the moment we could walk. We have spent centuries preparing for threats like the one you now face. Behind her, loading crews moved ammunition and supplies with the efficient brutality that marked all human space operations. These were people who could work in hard vacuum, sleep through acceleration that would crush most aliens, and continue fighting even when their ship was breaking apart around them. "We cannot promise that we will arrive in time to save your world," Chen continued. "We cannot promise that we will defeat an enemy that has been consuming star systems for thousands of years. But we can promise this. When we arrive, we will fight as if our own homeworld was under threat. Because that is what humans do. We survive. We adapt. And we protect those who cannot protect themselves." The transmission ended, and Chen turned to address her crew. These were men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous duty in human space. They operated ships that pushed the boundaries of physics, fought battles in the vacuum of space, and considered the loss of 30% casualties to be acceptable losses if the mission succeeded. "All hands, this is the Admiral." Her voice carried through every compartment of every ship in the fleet. "In 2 weeks, we will arrive at an alien star system to fight an enemy we have never seen, using weapons we are not sure will work, to save people we have never met. This is exactly the kind of mission that Earth trained us for." She paused, watching through the viewports as the massive fleet prepared to depart. "Remember your training. Remember that we come from a world that tried to kill us every day, and we survived by becoming the most dangerous thing in our environment. The galaxy is about to learn why humans are called Deathworlders. Let's make sure it's a lesson they never forget." The third Deep Space Fleet departed from Luna Station 12 hours later, their engines blazing with the controlled fury of miniature stars. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation under protective shields, home to billions of humans who had learned to thrive in impossible conditions. Ahead of them lay the unknown, and an enemy that had never faced beings who considered warfare just another environmental hazard to overcome. The human fleet arrived at the edge of the Kepler 442 system like a storm front moving across a peaceful sky. Veltar watched from the bridge of his remaining command ship as space itself seemed to tear open, disgorging vessels that defied everything. He understood about starship design. The ships that emerged were clearly built for war, but not the elegant, efficient warfare of civilized species. These vessels looked like they had been hammered together from asteroids and powered by barely controlled explosions. Their hulls were scarred and pitted from countless battles, and their weapon ports gaped like the mouths of hungry predators. "Taikao, many ships?" Veltar asked, though his voice trembled with the question. "Scanning now, Administrator," replied his tactical officer, her chromatophores flickering with amazement. "I count. This cannot be correct. Over 400 vessels ranging from scout ships to..." "Administrator, some of these vessels are larger than our orbital stations." The largest of the human ships was truly massive, a wedge-shaped monster that looked like it had been carved from a single asteroid. Its hull bristled with weapons and sensor arrays, and it moved with the ponderous grace of something that had never known defeat. Veltar's communication systems came alive with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was unlike anything in the galactic databases, deep, harsh, and carried an undertone of controlled violence that made the Jelnari's defensive reflexes trigger automatically. "Jelnari vessels, this is Admiral Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call. Please transmit your current tactical situation and enemy disposition." The directness of the communication shocked Veltar. No greeting. Protocols, no cultural exchange, no diplomatic niceties. These beings spoke like predators discussing a hunt. With trembling tentacles, he activated his translation systems and replied, "Admiral Chen, I am Veltar, Colony Administrator of New. Title. We are grateful beyond words that you have answered our plea. The Devourers have taken positions throughout our outer system and are beginning resource extraction operations. Our defense fleet has been reduced to 3 vessels." There was a pause. Then Admiral Chen's voice returned with what sounded almost like approval. "Understood, Administrator. We show approximately 2,000 enemy vessels, including what appear to be mobile construction platforms. Is this consistent with your observations?" Veltar's gill slits flapped in shock. The human spoke of facing 2,000 enemy ships, as if it were a routine problem. "Admiral, Perhaps you do not understand the scope of the threat. Each Devourer vessel is larger than our biggest city. Their weapons can adapt to resist any attack. No force in recorded galactic history has ever defeated them. This time, Admiral Chen's response carried an emotion that chilled Veltar to his core: amusement. Administrator, you should understand that humans come from what the galaxy calls a death world. We have been preparing for threats like this our entire evolutionary history. Your Devourers may be the largest enemy we have faced, but they are not the first impossible enemy we have encountered. The communication channel shifted to visual, and Veltar got his first look at a human being. Admiral Chen appeared on his screen as a bipedal creature with a rigid internal structure covered in what looked like artificial carapace armor. Her face was angular and predatory, with forward-facing eyes that marked her as evolved from hunting stock. Most disturbing of all, she showed her teeth when she spoke, a display that among most species would be a threat gesture. Administrator, Chen continued, we need tactical information about Devourer adaptation capabilities. How quickly can they modify their defenses, and what weapons have you tested against them? Veltar shared the combat data from his fleet's brief engagement, watching as the human's expression shifted from interest to what could only be described as satisfaction. She studied the recordings of Devourer ships absorbing plasma fire and adapting their hulls in real time. Excellent, Chen said, causing Veltar to question whether the translation systems were working properly. Adaptive defenses mean they have to dedicate processing power to defense modification instead of offensive optimization. We can work with that. Admiral, Veltar protested, you cannot possibly understand what you are facing. The Devourers have been consuming star systems for millennia. They have adapted to every weapon, every tactic, every strategy that civilized species have attempted. Chen's predatory smile widened. Administrator, has any civilized species ever tried nuclear saturation bombing followed by kinetic impactor? Attacks while simultaneously boarding their vessels with assault teams? The question made no sense to Veltar. Nuclear weapons had been banned by galactic treaty for over 1,000 years due to their indiscriminate destructive power. Kinetic impactors were considered too crude for modern warfare, and the concept of deliberately boarding an enemy vessel during combat was so dangerous that no sane being would attempt it. No, Admiral. Such tactics would be considered barbaric by civilized standards. Then the Devourers have never faced humans, Chen replied. We are going to show them what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Spoiler alert. Both sides take a lot of damage, but only one side is used to that kind of fight. The human fleet began moving into the system, and Veltar watched in fascination as they deployed in patterns he had never seen before. Instead of forming protective screens or organized battle lines, the human ships seemed to be surrounding their own fleet with overlapping fields of fire. It looked less like a military formation and more like a trap waiting to be sprung. Admiral, Veltar ventured, your fleet formation is unusual. Are you perhaps unfamiliar with standard combat doctrines? Chen's laugh was a sound that made Veltar's defensive reflexes activate involuntarily. Administrator, standard combat doctrines assume that both sides want to minimize casualties and preserve their forces. We learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to protect what matters. The Devourers are about to learn the difference between fighting for conquest and fighting for survival. As if summoned by her words, the Devourer fleet began responding to the human presence. The massive harvester ships continued their work on the outer planets, but hundreds of escort vessels detached from the main fleet and began moving toward the human formation. Their approach was methodical and overwhelming, the patient advance of predators who had never known failure. All human vessels, Admiral Chen's voice carried across the communication channels. You are weapons-free. Remember, we are not here to win cleanly. We are here to make them remember why they should not hunt Deathworlders. Veltar watched in amazement as the human crews responded to the order. There was no fear in their communications, no hesitation, or doubt. These beings spoke of facing impossible odds as if it were their natural environment. They discussed casualty projections and ammunition expenditure rates with the same casual tone that Gelnari used to plan city festivals. Administrator, Chen said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, I need you to take your remaining ships to a safe distance. What you are about to witness is not how civilized beings conduct warfare, but sometimes civilization needs protection from things that do not recognize civilized behavior. The first Devourer ships entered weapon range, their hulls already beginning to shift and adapt in preparation for the coming battle. Behind them, the massive harvester platforms continued their grim work, stripping away entire planetary crusts to feed their endless hunger for resources. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by crew members who checked their weapons one final time and verified that their emergency equipment was functioning. These were humans who had grown up learning that the universe was actively hostile to life, and that survival required constant vigilance and preparation for the worst possible scenario. All ships, she commanded, engage the enemy. Show them what children of Terra do when someone threatens the innocent. The battle for Kepler 442 was about to begin. The battle began with a display of firepower that redefined Veltar's understanding of warfare. The human fleet opened fire with weapons that no civilized species had used in millennia, nuclear missiles that blazed across space like miniature suns, followed by streams of metal projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The Devourer ships responded exactly as expected, their hulls shifting and adapting to absorb the nuclear fire. Their adaptive armor grew thicker and more reflective, designed to dissipate the intense heat and radiation. But even as their defenses evolved, the human weapons kept changing as well. They're switching to kinetic bombardment, Veltar observed, watching the tactical display with growing amazement. How can they carry so many different weapon systems? On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Chen watched the enemy adaptation with satisfaction. The Devourers were doing exactly what human tactical doctrine predicted, focusing their evolution on survival rather than optimization. Every cycle they spent adapting their hulls was processing power not dedicated to improving their offensive capabilities. Target the lead formation with tungsten penetrators, she ordered. All ships, fire as we bear. Make them adapt to that. The human fleet unleashed a barrage of solid metal projectiles, each one carrying the kinetic energy of a small asteroid. The Devourer ships began adapting again, their hulls becoming more flexible to absorb impact rather than resist it. But the humans were already switching tactics again. Deploy boarding pods, Chen commanded, and Veltar's world shifted into territory that defied all rational thought. The human ships began launching small vessels directly at the Devourer fleet. These were not missiles or torpedoes, but actual boarding craft carrying human soldiers. The concept was so insane that Veltar's tactical systems briefly shut down from processing overload. Admiral, he transmitted desperately, surely your warriors understand that boarding a Devourer ship is impossible. The environment inside those vessels shifts constantly, vacuum to crushing pressure, freezing cold to molten heat. No organic being could survive such conditions. Chen's response came while she was suiting up for combat herself, her voice filtered through a helmet designed for the worst environments imaginable. Administrator, humans evolved on a planet where the environment was actively trying to kill us every moment of every day. Shifting atmospheric conditions are just Tuesday for us. The boarding pods slammed into Devourer hulls with impacts that would have crushed any normal being, but the humans inside were protected by powered armor that was as much life support system as protection. They carried weapons designed to function in vacuum, crushing pressure, or temperatures hot enough to melt most metals. Veltar watched in horror and amazement as human assault teams fought their way through Devourer ship interiors that changed configuration around them. The mechanical defenders shot streams of molten metal and clouds of toxic gas, but the humans kept advancing. When their ammunition ran out, they used improvised weapons. When their weapons failed, they used tools. When their tools broke, they used their bare hands. Most shocking of all, some of the human soldiers continued fighting even after taking damage that should have been immediately fatal. Veltar watched one human warrior seal a breach in her armor with emergency foam and keep fighting in hard vacuum, using hand signals to coordinate with her teammates while her suit's life support counted down her remaining air supply. "How are they surviving this?" he whispered to his remaining crew. The answer came from Admiral Chen as she coordinated the battle from inside a Devourer ship herself. Her assault team had fought through 3 compartments that had shifted from molten rock to frozen methane to corrosive acid atmosphere, and they were still advancing toward the ship's central processing core. "Evolution, Administrator," she replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Our planet spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything that lived on it. The species that survived learned to adapt faster than the environment could change. We are not the strongest beings in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the fastest, but we are the most stubborn." The turning point came when human engineering teams managed to access a Devourer ship's central computer. Instead of simply destroying it, they uploaded viruses designed by human artificial intelligence systems, programs that had been created by a species that faced constant adaptation pressure from their environment. The virus spread through the Devourer network like a plague, corrupting their adaptation protocols and introducing errors into their defensive modifications. Ships that should have been adapting to resist human weapons instead began optimizing for threats that did not exist, leaving them vulnerable to the next wave of attacks. "Impossible," Veltar breathed as he watched Devourer ships beginning to malfunction. "They are machine intelligences. They cannot be deceived or corrupted." "They can be, if the virus is designed by minds that understand adaptation pressure better than they do," Chen replied. Her assault team had just planted charges in the central core of their target ship, and they were fighting their way back to their extraction point while the vessel began to tear itself apart around them. The battle raged for 18 hours, and, by the end, the human fleet had lost over a third of its ships. But the Devourer force was in full retreat, their remaining vessels fleeing toward the edge of the system while broadcasting corrupted data that would make their future adaptations less efficient. Veltar's sensors showed the aftermath of a battle, unlike anything in galactic history. Drifting wreckage filled space around both fleets, but the humans were already beginning recovery operations. Their ships that should have been completely destroyed were somehow still functional, held together by emergency repairs and the determination of crews who refused to give up. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Chen supervised damage control efforts while medics treated wounded crew members. The ship had taken damage that would have crippled any other vessel, but human damage control teams were already working to restore essential systems. They operated in sections open to vacuum, making repairs while wearing nothing but emergency suits. "Admiral," Veltar transmitted, "your losses. I am sorry. So many of your people gave their lives to save our world." Chen's response showed why humans were considered Deathworlders by the rest of the galaxy. "Administrator, in human military doctrine, 30% casualties is considered light losses. We expected to lose half our fleet in this engagement. The fact that we did better than expected means we can stay in the system and help with recovery operations." The concept of considering such massive casualties acceptable losses was beyond Veltar's comprehension. His people valued every life as irreplaceable, and the loss of even a single individual was cause for extended mourning. But these humans spoke of death and sacrifice as simply part of their normal operations. "How can you be so calm about losing so many of your people?" he asked. "Because we come from a world that taught us that death is always an option, but giving up never is," Chen replied. "Every human who joined this fleet knew the risks. They volunteered anyway, because they understood that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to stand between them and the darkness, regardless of the cost." As the rescue operations continued, Veltar began to understand something that changed his view of the galaxy forever. The humans were not just powerful warriors or advanced weapon systems. They were beings who had been shaped by an environment so hostile that every day of survival required courage that other species could barely imagine. They did not fight for glory or conquest or even survival. They fought because they believed that someone had to stand up to the things that preyed on the innocent, and they were willing to pay any price to fulfill that responsibility. The Devourers had fled, but they had also learned something that would echo across the galaxy. There were beings in the universe who could match their endless hunger with endless determination, who could meet their adaptation with innovation, and who could face their overwhelming numbers with the simple refusal to give up. The children of Terra had fought their first battle against a galactic threat, and both sides had been forever changed by the encounter. 3 days after the battle, Veltar floated in what remained of his command center aboard the human flagship Indomitable. The ship was still undergoing repairs, with entire sections sealed off due to atmospheric breaches, but the human crew worked around the damage as if it were routine maintenance. Sparks flew from exposed conduits, while technicians wearing pressure suits crawled through access tunnels that opened directly to space. The contrast between human and Gelnari approaches to crisis management could not have been more stark. Veltar's people would have evacuated to temporary shelters and spent months carefully planning each repair. The humans simply worked around problems and kept their essential systems running through sheer determination and improvised solutions. "Your people are remarkable," Veltar said to Admiral Chen as she reviewed repair schedules that would have been considered impossible by any other species. "But I confess I do not understand how you can function with such extensive damage to your vessel." Chen looked up from a data pad that was held together with emergency tape and powered by a jury-rigged battery pack. "Administrator, this ship has been our home for 3 years of deep space operations. We have fought battles in asteroid fields, conducted repairs while orbiting neutron stars, and kept our life support systems working with salvaged parts from 6 different ship classes. A few hull breaches are not going to stop us from doing our job." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. "Admiral, we are receiving multiple signals from across the galaxy. Long-range sensors show distress calls from at least 30 different star systems." Chen and Veltar made their way to the bridge, passing through compartments where human crew members slept in shifts next to their workstations. The damage to the ship meant that normal quarters were uninhabitable, but the humans had adapted by creating sleeping areas wherever space allowed. Some crew members had rigged hammocks between damaged support struts, while others had converted storage lockers into temporary bunks. On the bridge, the communications officer had compiled a summary of the incoming signals. The display showed a map of known space marked with distress beacons from species across the galaxy. Each signal told a similar story: peaceful civilizations under attack by threats they could not handle alone. "It appears word of our victory here has spread," the communications officer reported. "Other species are reaching out for help against pirates, raiders, and—" "Sir, 3 of these signals mention devourer attacks on other systems." Veltar studied the display with growing amazement. "Admiral, I believe you have accomplished something unprecedented. For the first time in galactic history, someone has defeated the Devourers and lived to tell about it. Word is spreading that the mythical Deathworlders are real, and other species are reaching out for protection." Chen studied the distress signals with the same methodical approach she applied to all tactical problems. Each call for help represented a different challenge. Some were facing organized pirate fleets, others were dealing with resource conflicts, and a few were confronting threats that defied classification entirely. "The problem is resources," she said finally. "We lost 1/3 of our fleet here, and Earth's shipyards cannot replace those vessels quickly. We could spend years responding to individual crises and never make a meaningful difference in galactic security." "But surely you cannot ignore these pleas for help," Veltar protested. "Many of these species are facing extinction. Without intervention, entire civilizations will be lost." Chen's response revealed the depth of human strategic thinking that had been shaped by centuries of fighting for survival in impossible conditions. "Administrator, we are not ignoring them. We are thinking bigger than individual rescue missions. If we establish forward bases and patrol routes, we can create a response network that covers the entire galaxy." She activated the tactical display and began marking systems throughout known space. "Here, here, and here. Strategic positions that would allow rapid deployment to any threatened system. We establish supply depots, communication relays, and permanent patrol fleets. Instead of being rescuers who arrive after the crisis begins, we become guardians who prevent crises from developing." The scope of what Chen was proposing took Veltar's breath away. She was talking about fundamentally changing how galactic civilization functioned, creating a military presence dedicated not to conquest or control, but to protection of the innocent. "The logistics alone would be staggering," he said. "The cost in resources, personnel, ships. How could any single species sustain such an effort?" "By not doing it alone," Chen replied. "Your people are master terraformers and environmental engineers. Other species excel at different technologies and skills. Humans provide the military backbone, but we build this network as a cooperative effort. Over the following days, as repair work continued on the human fleet, Veltar watched the beginning of something that would reshape galactic civilization. The humans did not seek to rule or control the species they had saved. Instead, they offered partnership and protection in exchange for cooperation and mutual support. The Jelnari contributed their expertise in planetary engineering and diplomatic protocols. Other species that responded to the call for cooperation brought their own specialized knowledge, advanced sensor technology, efficient manufacturing techniques, and scientific discoveries that had been developed in peaceful environments. But the foundation of the entire effort remained human military doctrine, the willingness to face impossible odds and pay any price necessary to protect those who could not protect themselves. Admiral Chen spent long hours in conference with Earth Command, discussing the implications of what they were undertaking. The conversation that decided humanity's future took place over subspace communication while repair crews worked around them. "Admiral," came the voice of General Morrison from Earth, "what you are proposing represents a fundamental shift in human foreign policy. We would be committing to defend species we have never met against threats we cannot predict. The risk to human lives and resources could be enormous." Chen's response was delivered while she watched human crew members working in hard vacuum to repair their ship's main sensor array. These were people who had volunteered for the most dangerous duty in human space, and they approached each life-threatening task with casual professionalism. "General, every human colony exists in conditions that would kill most galactic species within minutes. We have spent 3 centuries learning to thrive in environments that consider us an invasive species. The galaxy is just another hostile environment, and protecting innocent life is what we do." The decision that followed would echo through history. Earth Command authorized the establishment of the Terran Expeditionary Protocol, a permanent commitment to respond to existential threats against peaceful species throughout the galaxy. The human fleet dispersed across known space, establishing bases on asteroids, dead planets, and space stations positioned at strategic jump points. Each base was staffed by volunteers who understood that they might spend years away from Earth, facing dangers that had never been cataloged by any galactic database. Veltar found himself appointed as the first non-human liaison to the Expeditionary Protocol, helping to coordinate between human military efficiency and the diplomatic protocols that other species required. It was a role that gave him unique insight into how the galaxy was changing. The reports that reached his desk told the story of a transformation that went far beyond military protection. Species that had lived in fear of raiders and pirates began to establish trade routes and cultural exchanges. Civilizations that had remained isolated due to security concerns started reaching out to their neighbors. Scientific cooperation flourished as researchers no longer had to worry about their work being destroyed by hostile forces. But the most significant change was in how galactic civilization viewed the concept of defense itself. For millennia, most species had accepted that some threats were simply too large to resist. The Devourers, pirate fleets, and various cosmic predators were considered natural disasters to be endured rather than enemies to be fought. The humans had proven that no threat was truly unstoppable, that any enemy could be defeated if someone was willing to pay the price in blood and determination. More importantly, they had demonstrated that a species powerful enough to protect others could choose to do so without seeking to dominate them. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442, Veltar received a transmission that brought the transformation full circle. It was from a human patrol fleet that had just finished dealing with a Devourer incursion in the Vega system. "Administrator," came Admiral Chen's voice across the void. "Mission accomplished. Devourer fleet neutralized with minimal civilian casualties. We are proceeding to establish a permanent base in this system and have received cooperation offers from 5 different species. The network is working." Veltar composed his response carefully, choosing words that would convey the gratitude of an entire galaxy. "Admiral, when we sent our distress call into the void, we hoped only for survival. You have given us something far greater. The knowledge that we are not alone in the darkness, and that someone stands ready to defend those who cannot defend themselves."